Alright guys, we're back in my garage for another video, and if you're watching this video, you might have max cooling mode turned on in your tune, and I am going to convince you to turn it off. It's one of those features that works in theory, and I understand the idea behind it, but I think most B58 owners are actually putting themselves in a worse position by turning that feature on, especially if you're just daily driving your car and enjoying it with a pretty typical setup. It could be doing more harm than good. Now, I know a lot of people on the internet have an opinion, but thankfully, I can make my opinion very loud on this channel, so I'm going to explain all of the reasons why I think max cooling mode is not a great idea, and hopefully this information helps you make that decision for yourself. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Now, as always, for everybody that's new to the channel, I create these videos to help keep you updated on the latest developments in our community, as well as discuss technical topics so that we have a better understanding of how our engines work. So if you're interested in more videos like that, be sure to subscribe because there will be a lot more coming out in the future. Now, the idea behind max cooling mode is simple. You get as much cooling as possible to protect your engine components so that you don't have a risk of overheating. But at this point, I haven't actually seen overheating be an issue on the B58s for a couple of different reasons. The main thing to understand is that our cooling system is pretty complex. You have two completely separate cooling circuits. You have the low temp circuit, that's for your intercooler, your air conditioning, and I just recently learned even on the mild hybrid cars, it cools off the 48-volt battery. So that is designed to run at a low temp no matter what. And then you have the separate high temp circuit, and that's what cools off your engine, your turbo, it heats up your heater core, things like that. So you have two completely separate circuits that are designed to do different things and run at different temperature ranges. Then you also have three different water pumps. So you've got two water pumps on your high temp circuit and one on your low temp circuit. Now, two of them are electrical pumps, so they can be turned on and off by the DME, but you also have a mechanical pump now, and that's the one that's running off of your engine, and as long as your engine is running, that pump is turning. So that one you can't really change how it's running while the engine is on. So in reality, the max cooling mode can't change everything. The only thing that it can change is what's controlled by the DME. So that of course includes the two water pumps, the one for your turbo, as well as the one for the low temp circuit, but it can also control what's called the heat management module. And this module is a BMW thing that of course is reinventing the wheel. For years and years, we've had cars that run off of a thermostat controlled system. So basically the thermostat stays closed until your coolant and engine gets up to a certain temperature. Then it opens up and allows coolant to flow through the entire cooling system. So the heat management module replaces all of that. We no longer have a traditional thermostat, and instead we have this heat management module. Now it's bolted onto the side of the engine. As you can see here, it's attached to the mechanical water pump, but even though it's always running, the heat management module gives it some control of where the actual coolant is going. So it has an electric motor that turns a little rotary valve inside of it, and that has openings and vanes that sends it to different coolant hoses, so it only goes to the areas where it's actually needed. Now, on a completely stock tuned normal operation, there are four main phases that the heat management module runs through, and this is a diagram kind of showing how it all works. So you can see on the cold start phase, basically coolant is only staying in the engine. It's kind of short circuited and skipping all of the other cooling components. The reason is because if you have coolant flowing through your radiator, especially on a really cold day, it's going to take a lot longer to warm up because you have such cold air cooling off that coolant. So this basically keeps everything inside of the engine so it can warm up as quickly as possible. From there, we move over to the warm-up phase, and I think a really cool feature here that you can see illustrated is now we are sending coolant to the heater core. And again, if you guys have had older cars with a more traditional system, you know, in a really cold day, if you turn on the car and turn on the heat right away, it's going to blow a bunch of cold air in your face, and that can be really annoying. So with the heat management module, BMW is now able to control when coolant is actually going to your heater core and when the heater will actually start blowing hot air. So that's why when you first get into your car, especially on a cold day, you might have the heat on, but no air is coming out. But after driving a couple minutes, then you start feeling it. And that's because it's opening up that coolant circuit and only blowing air when it knows the coolant is above a certain temperature. Now, after you've gotten through the warm-up phase, you get to the normal operating phase. And this is just regular driving after the car's warmed up and you're running your errands or whatever. It's going to stay in this range. And what's going to happen is you're constantly going to have the heat management module changing where coolant is flowing to keep your engine temperatures at a specific range. So it doesn't want it too cold, but it doesn't want it too hot, and it can add or reduce cooling depending on the conditions of your engine. So this is really a key here that we're going to come back to. It's not trying to keep it as cold as possible, but it also doesn't want it to overheat. It's going to keep it in that safe operating range where everything is designed to run. And then finally, you have the max cooling setting, and this is where everything shuts off. It sends only 10% of the normal rate of coolant to your heater core, but pretty much everything is dedicated to cooling off the engine as much as possible. So this is kind of like an emergency situation or really high load. You'll have all of the coolant flowing through all the radiators, all the heat exchangers, making sure you're getting the absolute maximum amount of cooling possible. Now, some of this you can monitor in the car, but not all, especially if you have like a 2 Series, an F22 or F21 series. You don't actually have a temp gauge inside of your cluster, so you'll have to go into the hidden menu to see how these things are being managed. But if you have a 3 or a 4 Series or a newer like M340i, then you should have a temperature gauge in your dash. But keep in mind, there are different temperatures being shown depending on the car. So if it has this symbol, it's going to show oil temp. If it has this symbol, you are seeing coolant temp. And if you only have one indicated on the gauge, sometimes you can see the other one. If you go into iDrive, it'll show you both oil and coolant temp. Or again, you can go into the hidden menu to pull up the temperature for whatever's not already shown on your cluster. Now, as far as an operating range is concerned, I think this is the most critical piece to understand, because if you're not at the normal operating range, then you are at risk of a lot of things happening. The big one, of course, is just burning off moisture. Moisture and water vapor is a natural product of the combustion cycle, so that means it's going to be coming out of your engine when it's running normally, and it's also going to get mixed with your oil. So because of that, it's really important for your engine to get up to 212 degrees and stay there as long as possible so that all the moisture in the oil can evaporate. What you'll find sometimes is, especially in seasons like now, it's dead of winter, it's really cold, and if you're doing a lot of short trips where your engine doesn't warm up, you'll notice that your oil is starting to get like this brownish, kind of chocolatey looking mixture. And the reason is because you're not burning off that moisture, so a lot of the water is just staying in the oil. And the only way to really fix that is to do more frequent oil changes or keep your engine at operating temp for longer. So that's why it's not really a good idea to do a lot of short trips. You want to try to at least regularly get your car up to temp, run it for a good 15 or 20 minutes to get all of that moisture out of there. Also, this puts your oil at the optimal viscosity. For one, it makes the oil thinner so that you get less drivetrain losses, more efficiency, better miles per gallon, you know, all of those things. But I know a lot of people are like, well, you don't want oil to be hot, or you want it to be as cold as possible. But the exact same reason why you don't beat on your car when it's cold is the same reason why you don't want to overcool your engine. And you can kind of see where we're going here. But if your oil isn't at the ideal operating temperature, then the viscosity will be too thick. It won't be able to effectively lubricate all of the components in your engine, and you can definitely risk damaging things. And then even all the seals and gaskets inside of the engine are generally designed to seal the best at operating temperature. So when things are cold, there's going to be bigger gaps, and as it heats up and expands, it's going to seal up all of those systems and make sure that you have the most efficient engine running possible. So yes, a lot of this is designed just for emissions and things like that, but you still get to take advantage of a more efficient system when you're looking for the best performance. So all around, it's going to be best to keep your engine at operating temperature. Now let's talk about how max cooling mode works. And there are a couple different ways this is implemented. We're going to talk about boot mode as well as MHD and how they're different and how I recommend using it if you plan on keeping it on your car. So let's start off with boot mode, and you can see here in the description, it says that max cooling mode will reduce your water coolant targets by 10 degrees Celsius. So what that means is if you are targeting 212 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees Celsius, that'll drop it to 90 degrees Celsius, which is 194 degrees Fahrenheit. So now you're dropping it almost 20 degrees during those normal operating conditions. Now it also adds that on the B series engines, like on the B58, this enables the intercooler pump to be active at all times to lower intake air temperatures. So not only are you opening up the heat management module to cool things off as much as possible, but you're also activating that electric water pump for the low temp circuit pretty much all the time. So now you can have all the coolant flowing through there as quickly as possible and reduce your IATs as much as possible. Now on MHD, it's a little bit different. They've actually separated the high temp and the low temp max cooling modes. So the first one is this one that just says coolant mode, and there's a drop down where you can select stock, sport, or track. So the way that they explain it is in the coolant mode, you can change the coolant temperature target so that coolant volumetric flow will vary depending on the engine output and ambient temperature to hit those temp targets. So this is kind of key description here because it's not always going to change it. It's only going to change it depending on if you're beating on the car, if it's really hot outside and things like that. And it also gives you a couple different modes to use. So you can use stock, sport, or track. And obviously track does the most cooling, stock does the least cooling. So it really depends on how you want to implement it, but you have a couple different settings to choose from. Then they also have the sport cooling mode for the low temp intercooler circuit. And this one separately turns on the water pump for the low temp circuit sooner to keep IATs lower. So this, I think, is a key difference between the two, and this is why I kind of prefer MHD's implementation, because you can only turn on the one for the low temp circuit to keep your intercooler temps as low as possible without actually turning on the one for the high temp circuit and cooling down your engine. And they also specify that it only happens when you floor it. So when you get on the car and beat on it, or when the temps are really hot, then it'll activate that lower coolant temp target. So now let's bring this full circle. Why do I think this is a bad idea? And it's exactly what I said. It doesn't let the car get up to operating temperature as quickly as possible, and it doesn't keep it at operating temperature as long as possible, especially in the most demanding scenarios. So a lot of you guys have reached out to me and said, hey, you know, I'm driving my car and I don't want to beat on it until it warms up, but the needle's barely moving or it's stopping short. It's not getting up to the normal operating temp. What could be going on? And pretty much all of you have max cooling mode turned on. And when you turn it off, the operation goes back to normal. And so that's something that I'm really not a fan of. And I've tested it myself. I've seen that the coolant targets definitely drop, and it very easily keeps the coolant temps lower. But there's never been a scenario where I feel like that's actually an advantage. And I would even challenge you guys to go out there and find anybody that has issues with a B58 running too hot. Anybody that's dealing with overheating, blown head gaskets, you know, messing up your coolant system. I haven't seen that at all. So I'm really not a fan of this just because it doesn't keep you at that operating range, especially when you're flooring it. You know, you don't want the car to drop the temp so low when you're at the highest RPM and under the highest load. You really want it to keep things in that operating range, in my opinion. So I've heard a lot of you guys say, oh, you know, at a certain power level, it's a good idea. Or if you're tracking your car, it's a good idea. Again, I've posted multiple track videos on my car. I have a completely stock high temp cooling circuit. So I have stock radiators, aux radiators, oil coolers, trans cooler, all that is completely stock. And I haven't ran into any temp issues, even running 50-50 coolant. I mean, there are other things that you could do to reduce your coolant temps, running water and things like that. But I have had no cooling issues on the track. So again, I still don't feel like anybody really needs to turn this on. Now, of course, there are situations where it could make sense. One is if you're in a scenario where it is really hot, I don't know if you're in the desert or something, and you are experiencing really hot coolant temps, then yes, I could see it being an advantage to turn max cooling mode on. Again, I've never experienced that, even tracking in the middle of summer, but maybe you're somewhere that has a much warmer or drier climate than I do, and you experience those issues. I would just say, like most things, you need to pay attention to your car and make a decision based on your experience. Don't just assume that there's a default setting that everybody should be doing and works for everyone. The other thing is I am a fan of the sport cooling mode for just your intercooler on MHD, and I hope one day Bootmod separates those two in their settings as well, because I think everybody can take advantage of that, even on a completely stock car. It's kind of like, why not? You know, the only thing that could happen is you could wear out that water pump more quickly, but I haven't seen anybody deal with that yet. So maybe it'll happen, but I feel like it would take a long time for that to even be an impact. So yeah, those are my thoughts on max cooling mode. Sorry this video took a while to come out. I know I've told a lot of you guys this information, and I keep saying I'll make a video, but I just keep running out of time. So I finally made it a priority. Hopefully this helps answer any questions you guys have about how max cooling mode works, how our coolant system works, and what you should actually be concerned about if you want to make sure your car is running healthy. And let me know your experiences if you guys have found that it works perfectly on your car, or if you have the same issues I described. I'd love to hear more about it. But other than that, I think that's it for this video. So thank you guys for watching, and I hope this helps. And if you have any other questions or comments, leave them down below.